Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the Secretary of State for Transport, Justine Green.
You're gonna be bold, you're gonna be wiser, you're gonna be hard, you're gonna be...
Thank you very much, Mark. I must admit, I did have this heavy sense of déjà vu when I came in the room this morning just now, because I do remember coming to see you last year. And I, for what it's worth, I felt it was a very productive conference from my perspective. The views that you passed back to me and the discussion that we had on the panel, I think it was, around APD and travel overall, I thought was a very worthwhile one. And although we weren't able to entirely get rid of the rise in APD, in fact, I hope you did see that we did manage to at least delay it, which I thought was some progress, if not enough, as I knew you would feel in your own minds. But I'm delighted to be able to come back here again for the second year running. I think we all realise that we face very challenging and difficult economic times. I think whether you're running a government set of books or a travel agent set of books, or whether you're working in the airline or airport industry, these are difficult times. And I think that what I wanted to do today was to talk to you broadly about the things that I feel that I, within my portfolio and working across government, can really have an impact on, that I feel can really help you as an industry, which is so important. So, yes, we face challenging times. Do we control everything that happens to our economy when you look at what's going on in the Eurozone and the height of oil prices? No, but can we make sure we get our own economy back on track, our own public finances back on order? I think the answer ultimately is yes. And there are some things that we are going to be doing right in the next few weeks and months that I think can really help boost our tourism and our trade. And of course, I'll talk about the Olympics shortly. We've also got, of course, what's happening with our exchange rate, which I think can probably help you too. But I'll come on to more detail about what I think we're doing across government very shortly. But let's just quickly focus on the Olympics first. To my mind, over the next few weeks, and we see the Olympic torch setting off right now from Greece, so really things have begun as of 9:30 today, the Games is, frankly, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to showcase Britain to the world, and that's why we, as a government, have been so determined to get it right. From a transport perspective, it matters immensely because we've always pitched the Olympics as a public transport games. One of the first things I've been focusing on in my role over the last 6 months is to make sure that the DfT plays its role on making sure all those millions of tourists who are going to come to the UK to enjoy the Olympics with us, that their travel around Britain will take place in a timely, cost-effective, value for money, but also decent way that they can actually really enjoy. We certainly don't want transport to be something that they look back on as some kind of a problem that they encountered. And I think we've worked hard to make sure that we will deliver a fantastic transport infrastructure for the Games. We've invested £6 billion already. Huge work to add more capacity where we need it, better quality where we need it. I was at the Olympic Stadium and the Olympic Park last Friday. It's truly impressive, and we're already testing out to make sure that that last mile that spectators and the athletes walk along when they get off at Stratford is one that works well and can handle the flows that we're going to have. There's a huge legacy benefit as well to the Olympics, which I think can really benefit our country, which is, of course, tourism. And I know John Penrose will be here later in the day to talk a little bit more about our tourism strategy that we've got. And I think, really, when you look at the legacy alongside what I hope we can achieve on transport, I think tourism and our cultural export to the world is one of the most important things that we can try and achieve for the Games later this year. When I was at Gatwick Airport a couple of months ago and I asked them about some of the new flights that they are now putting in place from China, I asked where those Chinese tourists went. And I expected to hear that they headed up to Stratford or that they went off straight into London to look at Westminster or Buckingham Palace. No, they told me that they got on a coach and went to Bicester Village, off to go shopping for some of our amazing British brands. And I think what you see is this real cultural heritage that the UK has, not just for culture, but for some of those wonderful, iconic brands that we have created here in Britain. Those are the ties that I think we can really use the Olympics to help emphasise. If we get it right, we can create some relationships and some memories that I think will prove valuable to us all, but particularly to your industry in the years to come. So Olympics, key thing to make sure we get right from the DFT perspective, working very hard to do that. Secondly, of course, and Mark briefly referred to this, the Civil Aviation Bill. We have done some legislation, and that is nearly passed through Parliament now. It's just about got through the Commons. Now Parliament is back in session. It will make its way finally through the Commons and then through the Lords. And I think some real benefits for the industry. And the Aviation Bill giving us the prospect to perhaps look at more benefits again in terms of ATOL reform. We've reformed through the Civil Aviation Bill this 25-year-old framework that regulates our main airports. The bill itself, I think, will really start to ensure that our regulation of civil aviation is flexible, it's going to be more proportionate, targeted, and I think in putting all of that in place, it will ultimately be more effective. Critically, we've tried to put the passenger at the heart of this modernised approach, and I think we tried to make sure that there are the right incentives in place for airports in particular to invest in the right improvements that passengers and customers want. Of course, a key part of the Civil Aviation Bill, which I'm really delighted we were able to put in place, was around ATOL reform. This thing that I remember hearing about ATOL reform when I used to watch holiday programmes when I was growing up, not really knowing what it meant at the time, but something that's incredibly important for the industry in providing reassurance to consumers. But over time, as technology has changed, has become undermined, and a need from our government to make sure that we keep ATOL fit for purpose, so it provides consumers and travellers with that protection that they really need to feel confident when they're booking their holiday. So we are modernising it, as you've seen, better reflecting how people buy their holidays in the modern age, protecting critically more passengers, maybe around 6 million more passengers, and also, and as importantly, putting hopefully things on a much more sustainable financial footing too. So I really did want to just take this opportunity to say thank you to everyone from ABTA and in the industry for working with us as we develop those proposals and develop that legislation. Getting it right first time was absolutely vital. I know that there are additional elements of it that we haven't been able to do yet around agent for the consumer and airline flights, but clearly the Civil Aviation Bill will open up the powers that we need in place to look at progressing ATOL reform further, and we look forward to doing that once we've got the bill through Parliament. We set a tight deadline, I know, for ATOL reform, but I think we've tried to be pragmatic working with you to make sure it's a deadline that's tight, nevertheless one that we can reach, and I'd like to thank you all for working hard with us to make sure that for this holiday season as it comes into place in particular, passengers have that additional protection that I think they've needed for a very long time. Daisy mentioned aviation policy, and of course it is one of the key strategies that this government is determined to make sure, again, that we get right. We know that our aviation industry, and indeed our aviation network, is one of our most important national assets. But I think if it's going to grow and flourish, then we've got to clearly answer the question of how we tackle the need for more capacity, but also look at what we can do more in the short term around connectivity. We've also got to finally look at how we can do all of that in a sustainable way. And I think that that challenge that we face around how to meet our longer and medium-term capacity need around not just the southeast, not just in London, but just generally across the UK as a whole is incredibly important. We're working very hard to make sure that in the meantime, the service that passengers get and the use of the capacity that we do have is really maximised. We are working with the airlines, we are working with airports to make sure that we have the right transport links connecting up our airports to the rest of the transport network, to make sure that we do see connections to those new and growing economies that don't just help local businesses, but that can stimulate tourism as well. So I think there is a good news story to tell about aviation, and I think it's actually quite important that we don't lose sight of what we've got. Britain's home to world-class airports, world-class airlines, and world-class travel companies. And actually, when you look at our international connections, we've got 5 successful airports in London. I know if there's anybody from Southend Airport, they would probably be sat there thinking, hang on, there's Southend Airport as well, which is absolutely correct. We have got 350 international destinations that we are connected to. In fact, no other European city can match the number of connections that London has, and we shouldn't underestimate how important that is. 9,000 flights between Heathrow and New York every year, 2,500 flights to Singapore and New Delhi. We're market leaders there too. And I think if you add in 3,000 flights a year to Hong Kong, then you see that Heathrow provides more services to China than any of its continental rivals. The key is making sure that we maintain and extend that advantage, and I absolutely realise that. And we have a significant connectivity challenge for the future, because we have to make sure that as those new emerging economies develop, that we have the flight connections to enable our trade and our transport links to take advantage of that too. That's why this summer we will be putting out our final version of the draft aviation policy framework. It's something that has been worked on for the last 2 years. But alongside that, one of the first decisions I took coming into my job was that it really was time to grasp the nettle and look properly at capacity in the medium and longer term. And actually, realistically, my sense was that the aviation policy framework would go a long way in teeing up many of the important issues that we needed to in terms of how aviation can work day to day within Britain and how it can grow within Britain in the future. But what it wasn't going to do was really answer that important question around capacity. So the call for evidence is about helping us have a more informed debate with perhaps a little less heat and more light around how we can get to the right answer. This is not a question that governments have not tried to answer in recent decades. They have. If there were easy answers, I'm sure they would have been found already. But nevertheless, I'm very conscious of the fact that we need to reach a conclusion to this debate, and it's my intention that with the start of the call for evidence that we will set off on that final path to get to an answer that will actually be a strategy that a government is able to deliver. Passenger experience has been another thing that I've been absolutely determined to work incredibly hard with the industry and with airports on in particular. Clearly, we have seen problems at Heathrow and some of our busy borders, and I've been working hard with the Home Office and making sure that actually for big events like the Olympics, we do have the plan in place to manage some of those peaks that we expect to see in passengers. I think, though, more generally, this government is absolutely committed now to doing better, not just during the Olympic time, but all the time, to make sure that we have that passenger experience that we deliver within airports as people come out of our borders and come back into our borders. That's an experience that we think is working effectively, and I'm delighted to see some of the work that the Home Office has been doing to make sure that our border force can really start to work more effectively in the future. Clearly that's a piece of work that's underway now, but I think the additional resourcing that's going into Heathrow is already starting to make a real impact. Of course, I also am delighted to be working with my old department, the Treasury, who clearly have a big role to play in not just taking some of the key decisions that will get our economy back on its feet, but also taking important decisions around taxation. I should also say, referring to Daisy's point around the Queen's speech yesterday, that actually we shouldn't underestimate how much we can achieve without a bill passing through Parliament. I remember as a shadow economic secretary of the Treasury, a lot of businesses complained to me that actually government was passing too many bills and it meant too much regulation, and that was all bad news, and actually what they'd be better off doing is just getting on with running things that were already in place. And I think that has very much been one of the key things that this government has wanted to look at. So I don't need a piece of legislation to allow me to do what I did over the course of the last 6 months, which is to sign off on 45 road schemes that will tackle congestion and improve journey times in our country. I don't need a bill for us to do the investment that we're doing in the railway system. It's unprecedented, £18 billion just in this spending review. We haven't had that much investment in the railways since Victorian times. It's absolutely unprecedented for the industry. We are taking a Victorian railway system and bringing it into the 21st century. I do need a bill for high speed too, and that will hopefully be part of next year's Queen's speech once we've done what is a substantial amount of preparatory work to go for the hybrid bill as we pull it together over the next 18 months. So there is a huge amount of work that this government is doing that is about investing for our future. It doesn't need a bill in the Queen's speech, but it is absolutely happening. So I'm working within the DfT, Civil Aviation Bill, working across government with other departments like the Home Office and Treasury. We're looking longer term at what we can do to make sure we have our aviation sector thriving, not just now, but going forward. We're working more broadly as a government, in spite of the greatest challenges I think you could have when you look across the water at what's happening in the Eurozone and when you look at what's happened with commodity prices. We're working in spite of all of that to make sure that for us here in the UK, our public finances are in order. We're removing red tape off businesses, we're cutting corporation tax, and we're putting in place those building blocks that will mean that we get our economy back on track. It's a challenging time. We see our challenges overseas growing greater by the day in many respects, but I think what it means is that we can make progress on the things that we control here in the UK. One of the most important things for you, I think, and when I go over and go to transport councils, and I've been as a Treasury Minister to Brussels, there are some people sat in that room who no longer really take the decisions that affect their constituents, their industries, their people anymore. They're slightly straitjacketed by what they can do. When you talk to me here today, you are talking to a government and you are talking to a Secretary of State that are the people who do take the decisions. Our Parliament has decided on our deficit reduction plan. It's our Chancellor that takes decisions on our tax rates. Those are incredibly important things that there are other countries in Europe and other people in Europe who would really give their eye teeth to be able to have that direct decision making still residing right home in their nation states. We are still in control of our destiny. We're taking the right decisions to make sure we get our economy back on track. And I think in doing so, that is probably the best thing we can do ultimately to support your industry. We'll do, in the meantime, work hard on the Olympics. And again, I hope I can come back next year and talk to you again. Thank you.
Questions? Justine, thank you very much. I know you've got to rush off. We will just try to squeeze in a couple of questions. While you think of what questions you might like to ask, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things you said. When you were talking about atoll reform, it sounded to me like you're aware that the reforms are a bit half-baked at the moment, and it sounded like you are going to include airline websites into that reform. Did I misunderstand what you said?
It's something we're considering. It would probably need a consultation. At the moment, we don't have the powers to do it, and actually it's the Civil Aviation Bill that opens up the possibility of being able to look at that. So it's one of the discussions that Theresa Villiers is having with the industry. Once the Civil Aviation Bill gets royal assent, which we expect possibly around springtime next year, at that stage, it's actually something that we can practically look at the moment, as you say, although it's an issue that's been raised with us actually powers-wise, legally, it's not been something that we've been able to deliver.
And coming on to capacity, obviously you mentioned Theresa Villiers. She recently said there will definitely be no third runway at Heathrow. Again, your remarks, you didn't seem as anti. Now, I know personally you've campaigned for a long time against the third runway, but you were talking about other ways of increasing capacity. You mentioned connectivity many, many times. What other ways? And does that mean talking to BA about ways that Heathrow could be changed to increase capacity there without a third runway?
Well, I think it's important that we do look at what we can do now. We know that any decisions on capacity will take a number of years to be implemented. That's a simple fact. So we need to work really hard right now to make the most of the capacity we do have. If you look at what we're doing on Heathrow, we have completed phase 1 of the so-called operational freedoms trial. We're speccing out what phase 2 will look like. All of those things can help us use what we've got better. I'm also, of course, talking with the Heathrow Leadership Group. This is the group that doesn't just include BA, but includes airlines like BA and Virgin about, frankly, the challenge that we've got on connectivity. I don't decide where slots go to. In the short term, you know, those decisions are Willie Walsh, Steve Ridgway, and the airlines. And actually, I think one of the things I've raised with them is making sure we have a discussion about what we think our overall strategy needs to be to make sure we get the most out of Heathrow as our hub.
And you said final draft in the summer, but when will the conclusion be?
Well, my aim, as I've been clear, is to, if possible, actually get the draft APF finished or to get the final version of it agreed by the end of this year. My drop-dead date is March next year. That's what's in the business plan, but I can assure you all that although we've had a bit of an interim change in our timeline, my final timeline for finalising the APF is still March, but if I can get it done by the end of the year, I will do.
So next year's Travel Matters conference, it'll definitely be done. When you come back.
I absolutely am determined to make sure that that is the case.
And also, of course, if you do come back, that'll make you one of the longest-serving Transport Secretaries of State ever. I think 18 months is about the average, isn't it? Now, any quick questions before she does have to run off? Gentleman down at the front. Ah, hello.
Very much. Good morning, Simon Calder from The Independent. Thank you for your presentation. Very quick question, just clarification if you could, that there will be no third runway at Heathrow. All other options are being considered. And would that include full mixed mode, i.e. using both runways for landings and takeoffs at the same time, which I think adds 25% capacity instantly?
We've been very clear that as a government, and in fact there's cross-party agreement now, that we don't think a third runway is the right thing for Heathrow or for answering our hub airport capacity question. I think the Labour Party was clear that it doesn't agree with mixed mode. In fact, it was one of the first things it ruled out, and this government's been very clear that it doesn't agree with mixed mode.
Right, we're going to take 2 or 3 questions all together, and then you can do a quick-fire response. We'll take microphone 1.
Ian Taylor, Travel Weekly. You said you were delighted to see some of the work the Border Force is doing, and that the additional resourcing was already starting to make an impact at Heathrow. But the report this morning from the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration is damning both in detail and in its criticism of the Border Force, the cuts in staff, the failures of technology, etc. So what, and we're talking about incidents just a week and a half ago. So what exactly is improving?
Let's just take another couple of questions. So that's chaos at the borders, microphone 2.
Simon Johnson, Passenger Services Director P&O, and also representing the ferry industry in and out of the UK. A lot of information about the port, about airports, but what about the ports? 35 million people leaving the UK in and out, over 100,000 passenger journeys happening on ships. But we have the same issues in Calais. We've got the Olympic Games coming up, and actually we've been raising these issues and would like to meet you to discuss, because we don't want egg on our face. Great opportunity for the UK, but we could get it very wrong.
Lovely. Borders, ports, and one more. Gentleman at the front here, microphone 1.
Darren Kaplan, Airport Operator Association. Thanks for coming here, Minister, today. Obviously, my issue is around airports, and you've said quite clearly the sustainable framework for UK aviation will be known either by the end of the year or by March, so that's one good thing. In terms of the call for evidence on hub, can you tell us your timetable for making the decision on hub? Because without a timetable, this could go on forever and ever.
Just quickly taking those 3 things, I think it's probably better for the Home Office in the sense to set out exactly what the strategy is around reforming the Border Force. But I think everybody does accept that there is a problem that needs to be fixed. I think that is in the short term one that we are making sure we put the right level of resources against. Of course, in the medium and longer term, I think one of the interesting points that came out of the report today was the role of technology. What's most important, though, is that we don't compromise security. And so we have to make sure that security is never compromised. But I don't think that at all goes against having a streamlined experience for passengers in being able to get off a plane, get their passport checked, have the appropriate checks done, and then go on their way. So I'm very happy and indeed pleased to be working with the Home Office to make sure that what we can do is a joined up approach to not just helping passengers, but absolutely making sure that we keep our borders secure. On ports, I'd be delighted to meet with you. I know Mike Penning does a lot of work in this area. I have actually talked with Mike about making sure that we think our ports can deal with what will be, a fair number of additional passengers. Obviously, making sure Eurostar, for example, is able to cope. That's another key challenge for us to look at and have a plan in place for as well. And then finally, in terms of timelines, we will set those out as part of our call for evidence, but I think having clear timelines is actually very, very important for the industry. And I think it's important for the public and also for the political parties. Whatever conclusion we reach, we know that just as with High Speed 2, it's one that we need to get some political consensus about, because we know it will probably take at least 2 parliaments potentially to get delivered, and therefore that continuity of policy particularly matters for these big infrastructure projects. I think that it's an incredibly important debate that we need to kick off. It's not one that we haven't had before. So my intention is that we have a fast process rather than a slow one.
Well, on that note, I think we better let the Secretary of State go, but of course she is going to be struggling through all those striking policemen who I think are massed outside. So good luck getting through that. But please show your gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.